Hey there, it's another beautiful day. Let's watch some stuff. Some people do stupid things. Don't do stupid things. You are about to hear my opinion. Do your own research.
Nobody can convince me that the platypus is not a science experiment. It's like a duck beaver otter hybrid. It's also a mammal that lays eggs. It's also venomous, which is weird for a mammal, and its venom is found in its back legs. It just kicks you to envenomate you. It also doesn't have teeth, so it uses rocks to chew up its food. And I don't know where its food goes because it also doesn't have a stomach. It also doesn't have nipples, but it gives off milk, just kind of leaks out of its armpits. It's also an aquatic creature that doesn't have senses in water. It goes blind and deaf when it jumps in water. But that's cool because it can connect to the electromagnetic field. It can sense electrical pulses in other creatures' bodies. What?
Yeah, I got zero clue as to how that animal evolved into that, unless it's like some leftover from like the previous advanced civilization and it was one of their science experiments, or maybe all of the animals were freaking weird and did weird, unusual things, and then they split off to do like what we consider to be normal. Or maybe they're alien, I don't know.
They think cholesterol causes heart disease, for example, is because when you look at the arteries in an autopsy of a heart attack victim, you see a lot of cholesterol built up in the arteries. Therefore, the cholesterol was the cause of the heart attack. That's like saying, hey, every time there's a fire in my neighborhood, I notice firefighters at the scene of the crime, so they must be the cause of each fire. That's a stupid thought, isn't it? Because they're there to put out the inflammation. Cholesterol is there to put out the inflammation of the body. The illiterate of the 21st century are not those who cannot read and write, but those who cannot learn, unlearn, and then relearn. A lie told often enough becomes the truth. We saw that the last 4 years, didn't we? And one of those lies is the fear of dietary fat, and there's a term that I call lipophobia, which is a fear of dietary fat based off of 50 years of propaganda and misinformation.
So we had family in from all over the country this weekend, well, mostly back east, and they were over at our house Friday and Saturday night, and we were talking about this whole big fat lie and how it's actually not bad for you and how your body needs it. And that little tidbit was something that was huge because they're like, doesn't it cause like hardening of the arteries? And we were talking about how no, cholesterol comes in and repairs the arteries once there's inflammation. And it was a huge discussion, and we started talking about how it's been one big perpetuated lie. And if you keep saying it over and over again and, force the masses to follow it, then you have the result of what we have now. Hugely obese, everybody, really. And it's unfortunate. And they're never going to be like, oh, hey, by the way, we were wrong. Not going to happen. We have to do it one person at a time.
Can someone explain this to me? He throws the ball and floats across the ISS, and it picks up a bat off of the ground. And after he hits the ball, he drops the bat back down to the ground. All the while, he and the ball are still floating. Any answers would be appreciated.
See, it's stuff like that that makes me reconsider my whole we're out in space stuff. I mean, only a little bit because I got no explanation for that. It looked like he dropped the bat and it went straight to the ground as it should. I mean, even though it's not the ground, it's just the surface of the space station. Now I'm doing that. I have no idea. I cannot explain it. That is a very sketchy clip there.
They called him the Invisible Congressman, and no, this isn't science fiction, it's real American history. In 1948, Congressman William Cantrell supposedly resigned, but decades later, historians found something strange. No resignation letter, no obituary, not even a trace in the Social Security database. The same year, CIA documents reference a covert op called Project Eclipse, an experiment in psychological warfare and possible mind erasure. In his final speech, he said, "There's another government behind the one you see." He was never heard from again. So what do you think? Was Cantrell erased, or did he uncover something he wasn't supposed to? Follow Strange Scoops before you disappear from the algorithm.
So I'm having a tough time with this one because I'm trying to look up this William Cantrell fella and I got nothing. And I'm trying to look up this Project Eclipse and I'm also getting little pieces of nothing. So either it didn't exist and it was just a bit of, or they actually did succeed in like erasing all of it.
What if I told you that during the Cold War, a secret army operated right under the noses of the public? Enter Operation Gladio, a clandestine NATO program established to counter potential Soviet invasions in Europe. This covert network was part of a larger strategy known as stay-behind operations, designed to activate guerrilla tactics in the event of a communist takeover. Originating in the late 1940s, Gladio was initially intended to safeguard Western Europe by maintaining hidden arsenals and training recruits in the art of sabotage and espionage. However, the reality of Gladio's operations was far more complex and controversial. Not merely a defensive measure, Gladio units in some countries were accused of manipulating political landscapes through acts of terrorism and disinformation, aiming to sway public opinion against leftist movements. This shadowy network came to light in the early 1990s, when Italian Prime Minister Giulio Andreotti confirmed its existence, sparking debates about its true purpose and ethical implications. The revelation of Operation Gladio challenged the public's perception of democracy and security during the Cold War, highlighting how information and misinformation were weaponized in a battle for ideological supremacy.
Operation Gladio is my newest rabbit hole, and I want to thank Sam Fisher for just starting to dig that one for me, because I am going crazy listening to all of the fantastic stuff that he has uncovered about basically people working behind the scenes to push governments in certain directions and to create chaos amongst the people that's planned and to become the resolution. It's a bunch of false flag stuff, wagging the dog. All the world is indeed a stage. And I'm going to be bringing more Operation Gladio information as I come across it. And if you'd like to check it out yourself, go over to Sam Fisher's channel. He's just doing some deep diving stuff because that dude just is so good at that. And it's incredible.
They created something called the robo-rat. That was the first biohybrid. So a biohybrid is when you mix animal and a machine. And people freaked out. They were like, you cannot put brain chips in rats and make them move through a maze by a remote control, which is what they were doing. They now have pigeons that are mixed animal and machine.
What?
They created something called, there's a moth. So there's a Mandica sexta moth. That's what it's called. It's a large moth. And scientists put brain chips into the larva so that when it cocooned and became a flying moth, it had the chip built into its system, making it easier to integrate, and they could fly the moth around the lab. And that was a huge step. And this is now 4 years ago that I was interviewing these scientists.
I had pulled a clip from this interview a while back. I don't think it was the same clip. I'm pretty sure it was different, but I still haven't watched that entire interview, and I really need to because it is fascinating. This information that these scientists are just divulging about chips inside of animals and stuff like that. So apparently the birds aren't real, neither are the rats or the moths. I bet it was DARPA tech. I gotta watch that interview and find out who she's talking to.
Vean eso, mi gente. Hay una luz ahí bien potente. Empezamos a escuchar ruidos. Y vean esto, mi gente. Vean eso. Hay una luz ahí bien potente, mi gente. ¿Qué es eso? Vean eso, mi gente. Ay, no mames. No mames, no mames, no mames, no mames.
I seriously thought that I had pulled a dud. The title said, oh, a UFO lands in Mexico. And you know me, you get all excited about aliens and stuff. And I'm watching the whole thing going, oh man, I'm going to have to wave my BS flag. And then we see the little head on top. Okay, that made it all that much more better for me.
Did you guys hear about the Russian soldiers who were turned into stone by aliens in this declassified document? According to KGB materials, a spaceship in the shape of a saucer appeared above a military unit as they were doing routine training exercises. So, for unknown reasons, somebody unexpectedly launched a surface to air missile and hit the UFO. It fell to the earth, not far away, and five short humanoids with large heads and large black eyes emerged from it. So it later says it is stated by the testimonies of the two soldiers who remained alive that the aliens came close together, then emerged into a single object that acquired a spherical shape. So these aliens merged into one sphere, and it says at that very instant, 23 soldiers who had watched the phenomenon turned into stone holes. Only two soldiers survived this incident. The KGB report goes on to say that the remains of the UFO and the petrified soldiers were transferred to a secret scientific research institution near Moscow. It says that the soldiers were transformed into something that's similar or no different to limestone. And then it ends with if the KGB file corresponds to reality, this is an extremely menacing case. Oh shit. Why'd they shoot at the aliens? Maybe they wouldn't have turned them into stone.
Part of me feels like that was a little bit of a cover up, like by the platoon that got screwed in that situation. But of course, you know how much I love aliens, and I'm like, yeah, aliens did that. You shouldn't have shot at them, and that's what you get. And then there's another part of me that thinks maybe it was, a planned release of information by the KGB to kind of stir up some stuff. Because Russia's been known to do that. Like with the whole telekinesis thing, they're like, oh, here's a video that got leaked of some woman doing telekinesis, and now our whole country decides to go, the men who stare at goats path. And maybe they were like, hey, look, let's release some information on some crazy aliens that can do some weird things, and maybe they won't shoot down any suspicious vehicles that fly over their air for fear of turning to stone. I don't know. It's just a theory.
Over the last decade, we have learned that hybridization played a major role in human evolution, the evolution of our own species. Typically, when discussing this admixture, this hybridization, we're talking about our species, sapiens, which evolved in Africa, the Neanderthals, which evolved in Europe, and the Denisovans, which evolved out here. When it comes to this hybridization, the typical rule of thumb that we have learned is that populations whose ancestors mainly stayed in Africa are going to have the least amount of this. Traces of Neanderthal admixture, some pockets actually still have none, which that's a pretty recent development. Populations whose ancestors moved into Europe and then out this direction, they're typically going to have 2 to 3% of their genome from Neanderthals. And then populations whose ancestors quickly moved this direction and moved out into East Asia quickly and Oceania, they tend to have some Denisovan admixture. But this new paper is entirely different. It's hybridization, but it's hybridization that actually seems to have played quite a bit larger of a role in our evolution, and nobody's really been talking about it yet. The paper actually found that around 300,000 years ago, so right around the time we consider the origins of our species, two populations actually came together. And now today, our species, we have 80% of our DNA from one of those populations and 20% from another. The population that we get the majority of our DNA from, the evidence suggested that that population went through a bottleneck immediately after this divergence. So this population was much smaller, somehow became isolated somewhere, and then it gradually grew alongside this other population, but they weren't meeting. Something was keeping them separate until around 300,000 years ago, where they would meet. Some of this admixture would flow into our population, and that is the branch that is ancestral to all modern humans. But Neanderthals and Denisovans, their ancestor, it had already diverged from that branch before this happened. So we had this, those other species didn't. I was actually bringing this back up because there was a discussion from this other thread about why all modern humans today are considered the same species. You can see in the comment they say that all modern humans shared a common ancestor between 700 and 300,000 years ago, and that is Heidelbergensis. It's an oversimplification, because actually all modern humans, that last common ancestor was more recent than 150,000 years ago. Heidelbergensis is the population that we consider the common ancestor of sapiens, Neanderthals, and Denisovans, and we do think that that time period was roughly what that person said, but evolution is more complex than that, and that's what this paper is showing. With Neanderthals and sapiens, some experts will still argue that those should be considered the same species. Most agree that they should be different species, but with them, that last common ancestor was 500 to 700,000 years ago. So with modern humans, closer to 135,000 years ago, and that's why I consider, and so do scientists, all modern humans the same species, sapiens, and we do have some admixture, but that's normal in the animal kingdom. Most species will probably have some admixture from populations that they were once separated from for a while. That's evolution.
Well, that wasn't at all as fun as I thought it was going to be. But now we've had a little bit of a lecture on the evolution of Homo sapiens, Neanderthal, and modern man. There needs to be some aliens in there somewhere because that's more exciting.
So the more pharmaceuticals I'm taking, the more you can accurately predict my life expectancy?
The more accurately we can predict
Why
your
is
death.
that?
So you take things, for example, like statins, right? So statins lower LDL cholesterol. There was a prevailing theory in medicine, which is vastly being disproven now, largely by artificial intelligence and big data, that when LDL cholesterol is up, there's an increased risk of cardiovascular disease. And so if we lower LDL cholesterol, we'll lower the risk of cardiovascular disease. The only problem is you're looking at that so myopically, right? You're just taking that one variable, LDL high, high risk of cardiovascular disease. LDL low, low risk of cardiovascular disease. It's not that simple. In fact, there's no correlation between elevated LDL cholesterol on its own as an independent risk factor and cardiovascular disease. None. Cholesterol does not cause atherosclerotic plaquing or narrowing of the arteries. Damage to the arterial wall does, and the inflammatory cascade does. And so what happens is, if you understand what cholesterol is, right, it's not a fuel source. Cholesterol is a construction material. So the body makes it. The liver makes 85% of the cholesterol in your bloodstream. And what is it used for? Well, we build every cell wall, every cell membrane, every hormone in the human body, and we use it to make vitamin D3, cholecalciferol, the most important nutrient in the human body, in my opinion. And so what happens when you push this nutrient low? Well, now you buy yourself consequences down the road. Now you're interrupting cell walls, cell membranes, hormones, vitamin D3, and now people get on a statin. Now their joints start aching, their memory starts to go. Now they increase their risk for Alzheimer's, early onset dementia. Cognitive decline is one of the fastest accelerants of aging. People that are in steep cognitive decline are not compliant with their medications and protocols. And so you've taken this one independent risk factor, and because you think you're lowering the risk of cardiovascular disease, you create this entire cascade of problems down the road. And we saw this over and over and over again. In fact, we did not process a claim, not one, in my entire 22-year career on a centenarian that did not have elevated levels of LDL cholesterol at the time of their death.
Wow.
Not once.
Interesting.
But modern medicine would say LDL cholesterol is a risk factor for cardiovascular disease. No, it's actually a risk factor for longevity. High LDL and low triglyceride and high HDL cholesterol is a marker for longevity, not for cardiovascular disease. And so we believed a lot in what pharma and contrived medical trials were telling us was the standard of care, and the standard of care was killing people. Flatly, to be honest.
This was a huge part of the conversation that we were having on Saturday night. So James, Robert, Richard, that one's for you. You were asking about cholesterol, and no, I'm not concerned about having high cholesterol because the facts are there. The government just won't tell you. Your doctors are not going to tell you. And it's a shame. It's to get you on medication so that they get the kickbacks and Big Pharma gets their money and they continue to perpetuate this vicious cycle. And it's absolutely awful. Don't be afraid of the natural stuff. Be afraid of the chemicals that they're allowing you to put in your body with all the processed crap. It's horrible.
Leading scientists are now raising the alarm on British plans to block the sun. Raymond Pierre Humbert, a professor of planetary physics at the University of Oxford, said this month that the UK's gamble on solar geoengineering is like using aspirin for cancer. Calling the project barking mad, he went on, since 2021 commentary from ourselves, the situation has grown far worse, with tens of millions of dollars pouring into the scheme, mostly from private donors. Bill Gates was an early backer, and the tech and fintech industries have piled on since. But we never imagined that the UK government itself would be leading the charge into what is almost universally recognised as the most dangerous and destabilising source of research. Field trials that risk developing dangerous technology and paving the way for deployment. Did you catch the name there? Bill Gates. I know many people watching this now will be rolling their eyes at the mention of the Microsoft billionaire once again, but it is an indisputable fact that Gates does have his hands in many controversial cookies.
I seriously hope that I'm wrong in this situation, but I feel like if this does go through, bad stuff is going to happen. And we've talked about this before, and I think that if they cut out the sun, then the crops that have evolved in that area with that amount of sun will no longer be viable. And this sounds like one of Bill Gates' sneaky little underhanded, conniving little plans because he's funding this thing. Well, he's backing it anyway. He's got lots of money there. And once it does happen and the crops are no longer growing, he can use all of his thousands of acres of land that he's got here in the United States to sell them his crops because he destroyed theirs. It's sneaky. It's underhanded. And I hope I'm wrong.
As you are about to see, they will be spraying chemicals into the air to create cloud cover to block the sun and lower the Earth's temperature. CNBC reported here what Gates plans to do and how they are going to do it. They are calling this solar geoengineering, when in reality, this is biological warfare. I've then got an extremely alarming clip of climate scientists debating the morality of this issue and the cost of human life. RFK Jr. weighed in on this and has something to say about it as well. I'm Zach Costello.
Bill Gates is backing the first high-altitude experiment of one radical climate change solution, creating a massive chemical cloud that could cool the Earth. It's called solar geoengineering, and it's highly controversial.
How long will it be that countries keep experiencing these climate impacts before someone gets desperate and says, hey, we need to cool the planet with solar geoengineering?
It would look something like this. Thousands of planes would fly very high and use nozzles to inject millions of tons of light-reflecting particles into the stratosphere. It would create a thin chemical cloud of those particles around the whole planet, blocking some sunlight from reaching the surface. It would mimic a giant volcanic eruption, which we know cools the Earth.
So, you know those chemtrail conspiracy theories? I mean, my wife got there before I did, but are you freaking kidding me? The experts who have literally gotten everything wrong now plan to block out the sun with chemicals, and they promise it's going to be safe and effective. We've heard that before. Trust us, guys. Here are the scientists debating the morality behind this decision.
Can I leap in? This is a really important moral point. So if I made a decision, or if there was a collective decision to do a geoengineering program, and you put, say, the kind of program I think makes more sense to put about 1 million tons a year in, but let's say, you might end up killing many tens of thousands of people a year as a direct result of that decision. I think that has moral consequences. I don't sweep that under the rug. So this is a case where I take this much differently from Alan and think it's a much more serious issue. Now, it's true that as part of doing that, you would hope that the overall benefits of human mortality would be so that you would save many, many more people than that. But the fact that you would save more people than you killed doesn't mean there's no moral impact of making a decision that directly kills people. And I think that we who talk about this have a duty to be clear-eyed about the direct risks involved in doing it.
I actually think one of the most important questions we heard from was the question about acute triggers, and sort of I think we've seen this in this country with Sandy, where climate change for at least a little while came back on the political radar screen because of extreme weather, whether it was actually caused or affected by climate change or not.
So quick change of subject there, but that guy thinks this has moral consequences. Well, look at these scientists willing to sacrifice human life to save the planet, blocking out the sun, literally. This is one of the dumbest things that you can possibly do from a common sense standpoint. I don't care what these guys claim to be experts in. Common sense. Aside from God himself, the sun is literally the source of life. We cannot live without it. Nothing can. In fact, areas of the world where there is less sunlight results in all sorts of mental ailments like depression.
Well, in true Mrs. Collins fashion, I don't have the entire story. So I'm going to have to find the rest of the story because it said RFK, and clearly there was no RFK talking in there, and I want to know what the heck is going on. I didn't know that they were talking about doing it. Well, I did know that at one time they're like, hey, this is a global proposition, but now it's the British government that's like, yeah, let's go for it. Do it. Let's try it out. But at the same time, I mean, once it's up in the air, it doesn't just stay there, right? We have like wind and like weather patterns and stuff goes places and does different things. Once something happens in like here, we're affected by it over there because the wind brings it. The sky, the sky delivers. But I just think it's absolutely crazy that these freaking rich nut jobs who are trying to depopulate the planet, need I remind you about the whole, World Economic Forum, fellas, that it's their goal. That's their, it's crazy. It just drives me absolutely bonkers that this is even a consideration. All right. I hope you're ready for the next part of our series because here it is.
And in the end, the CIA had a total of 9 secret prisons, at least that we know of. The network included another Eastern European country, a prison in Lithuania, where the CIA used a shell company to purchase this nondescript barn that had been an elite horse riding club. It was called Detention Site Violet. They ran 4 of these secret prisons in Afghanistan, including one that was nicknamed Dark Prison, because prisoners were held in metal shipping containers in complete darkness and isolation, sometimes with loud music playing to keep them awake, among other horrific treatment. The CIA would also work with countries like Jordan and Egypt, where their intelligence officers would use torture, but the CIA agent would be right there guiding the whole thing. And there's evidence that the CIA also turned ships into black sites, floating prisons where they could interrogate their prisoners on international water. All in all, the CIA ended up interrogating 119 prisoners using this network of black sites. And of the 119, they ended up releasing 94 of them. Some were sent to foreign custody, some were just released, and some have a status that is still unknown. And some turned out to be totally innocent, like Maher Arar, who was a Canadian-Syrian dual citizen, who was taken by the CIA in an airport in New York on his way back home to Canada. Then he was transferred to Syria and tortured for a year before the CIA realized that he was the wrong guy. The Canadian government ended up paying him $10 million for his troubles. One guy named Gul Rahman died of hypothermia at a black site in Afghanistan while he was chained naked to a concrete floor. No CIA officers were punished. One German citizen was held and interrogated in a hotel room in Macedonia for 23 days before being flown to Afghanistan and imprisoned for 4 months. Before the CIA realized that, once again, he was the wrong guy, he was released with a meager apology and a small payment. But then there's prisoners like Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, who most people consider the mastermind of 9/11, the guy who planned it. Or Abd al-Nashiri, who's charged with planning the bombing of an American Navy ship just before 9/11, the USS Cole. Or this guy, Hambali, who's known as the Osama bin Laden of Southeast Asia. Like, these are guys who need to face justice. They are most likely responsible for the gruesome murder of thousands of innocent people. And in a post-9/11 America, there was so much anger and need for revenge. The idea was that torture was totally justified, especially if it stopped another attack. But what's really happening here with this massive network of secret prisons and this enhanced interrogation is that the CIA is falling into Al-Qaeda's trap. And internally, you start to see how people in the CIA know that this is actually a bad idea. Many stopped wanting to participate in the enhanced interrogation. Some were brought to tears while witnessing it. One memo shows how the CIA started sending their worst people to do these interrogations, leading to mediocre or useless intelligence. And while all of this was secretly happening, President Bush was publicly saying,
I want to be absolutely clear with our people and the world. The United States does not torture. It's against our laws and it's against our values. I have not authorized it and I will not authorize it.
But eventually the world would catch on. The Washington Post was one of the first to report on this in detail. And then a former CIA chief of counterterrorism in Pakistan, the one who directed a lot of the raids to capture these prisoners, went public, telling a journalist that the CIA had been waterboarding prisoners, a torturous technique that induces the sensation of drowning over and over.
Well, he goes into a bit too much detail about how that in fact is done, and I'm not going to put that on my channel. But that is insane. They like got the wrong guys sometimes. And that still probably happens. They get the wrong guy and they're like, here's a whole bunch of money. Or they disappear, you know? But wow, I can't believe I didn't know about this. This is absolutely crazy, and I can't wait to see the next part, and that'll be on Wednesday. Thank you so much for sharing your time with me. If you haven't already, please hit that like button and consider subscribing, and then come on back in a couple of days. We're going to watch some new stuff. I'll say different things, and it's going to be fantastic. Until then, have a wonderful day.
Fastest train in North America. The California High-Speed Rail is a mega project currently under construction in the state of California.